We will move now to our discussants. As Lisette mentioned in the beginning, after every session, we have discussants that share their reflections with the audience. So first of all, thank you very much to the three presenters in the session who have provided us with thought-provoking ideas, shared their out-of-the-box thinking, and helped us to reimagine what solutions could look like that support girls to meet their menstrual needs. I would also like to thank all who have asked questions and took part in the discussions. We realized that we have not answered all of the questions. We will collate all of these questions and provide answers in the conference report. So they will not go unanswered, and we will continue discussion in the Yammer group and in the conference report. So watch out for that. To conclude this rich discussion in the first section, I would like to invite two discussants to share their reflections on what was presented, the key lessons they took away from these presentations, and or the relevant implications of these innovations for the wider field. First, I will invite Évariste Kosai-Komlan to provide his reflections. Évariste is currently UNICEF's regional advisor for WASH in East Asia and the Pacific, followed by Chelsea Haggard, who in her current role at WaterAid Australia leads the technical program support on equality, rights and inclusion on water, sanitation and hygiene. Évariste, over to you.
Yeah, hi. I'm very happy to be here and then talk, have a reflection on the three presentations that we hear so far. And I'm just happy to say that there's quite some similarities that I will point out first and go to some particular issue related to menstrual health, which is not only today, you can see it's not only girls and men issue, but also related to men and the whole society involved in the process. And this is what we have seen throughout the presentation that we have seen so far. Usually, menstrual health is attributed to taboo, and this is what we have seen so far in Sri Lanka presentation, some cultural issue barrier that related to that also, and how many people, many partners are engaged to make the agenda move forward. We can see also some part that the children and girls are very involved in the whole process in the design, which is very particular we have seen in terms of innovation that was presented. And one important takeoff for the whole discussion is that if you all are involved in the process, we can help manage better menstrual health, and also it can be very beneficial for everyone. 2 points to consider in the whole discussion is not only one man show issue, it's more multi-party and multi-sectorial partnership approach that involve taking into account some consideration, like the whole policy discussion that we have here so far, and how in some of the country having some incentive for private sector, make sure that there's a supply related to menstrual product available, and also make sure that there's a whole recyclable process in place, and also incentivize the way that the funding is going to the menstrual health management. The second thing that I would say, and coming up during the discussion, is like the whole coordination process. You can see on the financing side, you can see during the OKI discussion, and also you can see during the Sri Lanka presentation that coordination between different ministries, many actors, and also different stakeholders play a huge role to make sure that the service is well delivered to the population, to the women and girls as well. And one particular aspect that was coming up in the whole discussion, whether it's Sri Lanka or in a Pacific presentation, the whole issue related to financing. And Sri Lanka is clear mentioned the whole how important the budget is for to take at a scale, appropriate scale, the whole menstrual management issue, and also how in a Pacific case, financing playing a huge role to make sure that there's a sustained supply in a product as well. One particular issue I want to put in place, I want to give on the reflection is how well we are monitoring the process, we are monitoring the delivery of the result that we are achieving in dealing with menstrual hygiene management is something that we need to consider as we go along. And also, what capacity need to be in place. And we are talking about women entrepreneurship. We need to equip them. We need to make them very active. We need to build their entrepreneurship skill so that they can enter in the business. Not only women, but also men need to be involved as well. So that is more something that we take seriously. So about two reflections before I move along is one, during the time of COVID now, I think like, Patty said in the beginning, a period will not go away anyway. It's something that we need to deal with, and we need to make sure that we continue having the supply. We need to make sure also that after use of the product, they are well disposed and also all incinerated, like we have seen in Sri Lanka. So this is very particular time that we need to pause and reflect on how we can better innovate in this sector and how we can make sure that the supply continue. And if in the coming 4 months, those people who rely on a trade supply, they don't have the supply, how basically we make sure that at local level, the capacity is developed to have those kind of local entrepreneurship to feed the market. I think it's something that might be very important to think about as well, so that the continuity and the sustainability of the supply cannot be jeopardized as we are thinking about that as well. So some of the key approaches, I found very useful, whether it's on digital side using OKAI, or whether it's from on the financing side, might be very, very useful to think about as we move along. One is related to the private sector engagement, and then the small, medium entrepreneurship engagement in the whole sector. I think they will play a huge role if you want to make the whole MHM service delivery at a scale. I'm talking about service delivery, not only supply. And I was discussing with the team yesterday or last week how we are thinking not only supply, but how we dispose the waste of those products that we are managing, and how we close the loop on menstrual hygiene product, as it's something that we need to think about very careful, and how we don't dump all those waste in the environment. The fundamental issue that we are having now, most of the program that we are developing are more school-based program. How we take it to scale to the community, to the entire society, is something that we need to think and build on those aspects. And this need to take into account how we organize the SMEs or the private sector to engage in the discussion. Also on financing and investment side might be very important. Related to that is how also we support the government to bring some incentive for those people dealing with menstrual hygiene product and services. How do you incentivize them? So one of the key reflections related to how we incentivize them and how the government can play a rich role brought me attention to talk about something that we have known so far in water and sanitation sector, which is the viability gap analysis, right? This gives you, based on the policy, based on the advocacy developed at the high level, to bring a sort of aspect related to how we incentivize many people, many sector, private sector to engage in this business might be very important to think about. This will imply a lot of innovation, new thinking, whether it's digital or whether it's physical, like incinerator, or whether you develop the whole supply chain along the way. I think it's very important to think about it. And then the second aspect related to that is, I would say, the greater partnership. Innovation and greater partnership are fundamental as we move along the whole scale that we want to achieve when we are talking about menstrual hygiene management. And then the last point is what we know also in water and sanitation sector might be applicable in those sectors that are not, so much, you cannot see, is more product based, but how do we sustain? Is more how we think about something like social entrepreneurship, And then the case of Fiji is showing this, particularly that we can basically extend and apply along the chain as we go along. So for concluding my some of the point and then related to all the three, I would say I've tried myself the Okai, which is good. I've basically put it for my daughter, 12 years old now, using Okai in the house. Is very, very good. And I can recommend to many people, many colleagues, and many parents basically to do the same. And then, use the application for those their girl as well in home for their wife as well. Is very, very important. So to conclude, I'll conclude on two things and how we look at things, moving forward. One thing that I think might be very important that, all together, like Marina say, we need to think about how we develop a new model or investing in this sector. This implies, engaging more with the government, around the policy discussion, around the incentivization of the sector, or some conditional support to water and sanitation sector might link basically to leverage more on MHM. I think this is one important point. And then the second one that I need again to emphasize on innovation, not only on technology, on digital, but on some key approaches and new way of doing in this particular time, I think might be very important if you want to move the MHM agenda forward. So I will stop here and give the floor to Ada. Over to you, Tabitha.
And I will pass it straight on to Chelsea.
Thanks, Jacinta. Can you hear me? I can't get my video. Oh, there we go. It's working. Great. Thank you so much, Everest. You touched on some really critical points there that I won't go over the similar ones around sort of policy and incentivizing. I think what really struck me by these three fantastic presentations, and I should say it's really late here and I was worried that I'd be sleepy, but actually the content's been so interesting that I really enjoyed it. What really struck me is that innovation happens at different levels. And it really happens in such diverse ways. And if we look through at those three presentations, we can see that menstrual health solutions need to happen across those three levels. To the individual level, the OKI period tracker really was that empowerment, that core empowerment of adolescent girls and seeing themselves as confident and having the information they needed. That's so essential to menstrual health innovation and solution. Then with the Sri Lankan example, that's really the environmental innovation that we need to see at that local systems level. And so while we often think of digital platforms when we think of innovation, that low-cost technology, that's scalable, that brings together different departments in government is absolutely at the core of innovation. And so when I saw those two presentations together, it really got me thinking about it's how we bring actors across these different levels and how we work together with different types of innovation. I thought it was really interesting as well, some of the questions that came out with our colleagues from Sri Lanka, really looking at the learning aspects and how they leveraged the pilots to then influence the sector practice. And that came through in some of the questions around how did you change policy or how did you do operation and maintenance? And I think, again, that's a really great example of innovation where it's being done at the local level, but those pilots and that testing on the ground is being leveraged across the sector. And then, of course, finally, we go to a more macro level with Melina's presentation of the ecosystem. And if you're a development practitioner like me, that's a whole set of language and approach that's really new and innovative. But working here in the sector and in the region, it's really changed the way menstrual health actors are talking about the issues and the solutions. And I think what's interesting about that is it's women-led, it's having women enterprises at the centre, but really bringing that market-based approach and the private-public partnerships together. That's starting to shift the way menstrual health is perceived in the Pacific not just as a gender equality issue, but as a market-based issue as well. So I think these 3 presentations have given us a lot to think about as practitioners and how we work across those different levels. I think for me as well, it really reiterated the opportunity that we have when we look at menstrual health solutions, whether we're working at the individual level with girls, whether it's at that local systems level with government, or at that macro level of ecosystems. How do we really keep social norms at the centre of that? So how do we keep making sure that we are tackling those harmful gender norms that really do underpin the unmet need of women and girls when it comes to menstrual health solutions, and particularly for adolescent girls who may have less power than their colleagues or their peers, or those who are older around them. So perhaps just going back to Paddy's really inspiring words at the beginning of the day of how can we reimagine the world, and that this is such an opportunity for us to do so. I think it's a huge congratulations to those 3 presentations, which have given us such a flavour of the type of innovation that's happening in South Asia, Southeast Asia and the Pacific, to really put women and girls at the centre of their own development. But for us as practitioners to really challenge ourselves to think about that underlying power and how can we be tackling those norms within our innovative solutions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Chelsea, for these reflections, and Everest as well. This has been really great to wrap up the first session, to draw parallels and connections between all of these 3 very different but yet important interventions that all play together to build an ecosystem to make MHM work for girls in schools. Before we go into the panel discussion, I have 2 admin things, 2 admin announcements. First, there are lots of questions related to COVID-19 in the Slido. We don't want to let the pandemic take over the conference, but we will share a number of resources on Yammer. So if you are interested in accessing some resources regarding what kind of advocacy or what kind of interventions we should keep an eye out for in the context of COVID-19, please go to the Yammer group. The second, there are lots of questions on how to get in touch with Gerda regarding the Oki app. She is also available on Yammer and also can be reached through the Oki website.